Well, hello there. I think it's close enough to 4 o'clock, don't you? I might be about 30 seconds early, but let's just get going. Hi, everyone. It is Kristi. It is Sunday, and so it is time to smash the patriarchy. We are continuing on with The Evolutionary Origins of Patriarchy by Barbara Smuts. And we're just gonna jump right into it. At the end of the video, I might talk a little bit about the video I'm currently working on based on this article, but I know that you are really, really waiting to get into the hypotheses and to wrap this up. So I don't know if we'll get as far as the end today, but I think we'll get through all 6 hypotheses. So we'll see how it goes. Let's go ahead and get going on Speechify and learn a little bit more about Smuts' ideas of how patriarchy developed over time. So last time, just to kind of remind you, I'll go over the hypotheses, not the entire article, just as a little, to provide the background context to remind us all where we were. So hypothesis 1, to explain the way that patriarchy developed across human societies. Among ancestral hominoids, female ability to resist male aggression was compromised by reduced social support from kin and female allies. So we know that taking females out of their kinship group and bringing them with like the males group denies them agency and cooperation to resist coercion. Hypothesis 2, over the course of human evolution, male alliances became increasingly well developed. These alliances were often directed against females, and they increased male power over females. So again, by sort of divide and conquer strategy, males were able to see women as a group that they could band together to control and create various social structures that would reinforce that. Hypothesis 3, over the course of human evolution, particularly since the advent of agriculture and animal husbandry, males gained control over resources that females need to survive and reproduce. This increased male ability to control and coerce females. So you see expanding ways, resource management, social enforcement, violence, all of these things in order to control women's female sexuality. Right? We're not talking about gender here. We're just really, again, it's not comprehensive. We're really looking very narrowly at how we can think about human sexual behavior. So now we're going to start on hypothesis 4 and see where Smuts takes us this time. All right, let's go.
Hypothesis 4. Over the course of evolution, male sociopolitical arrangements increased the variance in male wealth and power and perpetuated family differentials across generations. As a result of increasingly unequal relationships among men, women became increasingly vulnerable to the will and whims of the few most powerful men, and women's control over their own sexuality was greatly reduced. Scholars have repeatedly noted a positive association between the degree to which male-male relations are organized along hierarchical principles and the extent to which women are controlled and dominated by men.
So I think that what she's saying there is that in societies where men are highly structured, women are highly controlled. And in comparatively societies where men have a looser structure or there's more flexibility, I would say, in hierarchies, then this also sees a knock-on effect. So control begets control is sort of, I think, the direction she's going in here.
An evolutionary perspective can help to make sense out of this relationship. In any gregarious species, male attempts to dominate and control females are likely to be successful only to the extent that males can also dominate and control other males. If no male is capable of dominating any other male, an idealized situation only approximated in nature, then coercing females into mating will not work because other males will always have the power to intervene, and they will do so because intervention will simultaneously reduce a rival's reproductive success and increase the intervener's own chances of gaining sexual access to the female.
So I understand in a theoretical, I'll just say, I'm a little bit tired of this reductivist notions of sexual motivations here, right? Because we are placing a lot of cognitive forethought and strategy and conceptual language onto these primates, and I am not convinced exist. So I think that pragmatically, one can make a very good argument for saying, well, we act as if they are making these decisions because the outcomes are the same. We can interpret it as if they had this understanding of, if I defend this female from that male, I might get laid. Yeah, theoretically it works. I don't actually think that's a really high, cognitive functioning level here. I think there's a lot more about instinct and emotions here, loyalty, empathy, friendship, a desire to protect. I think there's a lot of other things that come in with intimacy that, you can build. Like, I'm sure, like, we know animals are very affectionate and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I just want to just push back a little bit on the way that this is being described about, without high amounts of male hierarchy, men are more likely to compete on an equal footing without an artificial ranking that would require deference. And this, but this whole idea, like, yeah, again, I'm just repeating myself. I understand it in terms of an as if. I don't buy it as an accurate description of what is happening in a monkey's head. Like, I'm going to defend my female friend, and then later on, it just seems a little too highly linguistic.
Thus, the coercive strategy will be unstable, and the most reproductively successful males will be those who compete by providing females with benefits that lead the females to voluntarily choose them as mates. In contrast, to the extent that some males in an animal society dominate others, the more dominant males can adopt a coercive mating strategy with less interference from other, less powerful males. Among humans, as variance in male power increases, it becomes increasingly possible for the males at the very top to use their power to exclude other males and monopolize control over females, resulting in extreme polygyny among the elites and a shortage of mates among men at the bottom of the hierarchy.
Again, I have some possible quibbles with this, but I'm not enough to get into the details. But I think we should just, again, more reflect on the way that social hierarchies make it easier. Once in a social hierarchy is accepted and internalized, then you can take the dominance even more. You can, there's no limit on the dominance. If people are willing to accept oppression and second-class status, or if they are denied opportunities to move out of that status, yeah, then you're going to see more resources of all kinds being consumed by the elite. And I've been arguing now for a while that my reconceptualization of patriarchy is about a group of, elite in-group men controlling the sexuality, sexual activity, sexual identity, sexual culture of an entire populace, while basically, holding themselves harmless and letting themselves get away with whatever they want, and getting as many resources as they can. So it's way more about men ruling women or the father of the family. It's far more broad than that, as I've described many times now.
Simultaneously, the alternative male strategy of providing females with benefits becomes increasingly ineffective, both because subordinate males experience a reduced capacity to provide females with benefits, especially material ones, and because female ability to choose mates freely is constrained by the actions of dominant. 18 Human Nature, Volume 6, No. 1,
Should have skipped that bit.
1995. Males. Thus, the degree to which men dominate women and control their sexuality is inextricably intertwined with the degree to which some men dominate others.
And, this is why patriarchy doesn't work for everyone, which we know, right? But it's still better in a social class stats to be a member of the in-group than to be a member of the owned group, right? But, the more men oppress each other, the easier or more natural it is to oppress even, women in this situation, probably any minority groups, right? So
the two features considered in Hypotheses 3 and 4, male control of resources and male potential for polygyny, have important implications for female reproductive strategies. This brings us to the fifth hypothesis for the evolution of patriarchy.
Also, I just don't think that, okay, the reason, I'm just going to throw up a little question that I have here or would want to press her on. because of, I don't know at what point in time she's talking about. When I think about, even Genghis Khan, who had a lot of sex with a lot of women, there were still plenty of women to go around. I mean, it's like they're more generally women. Like again, we're gonna divide it because of the small amount of intersex people, and we can't necessarily historically retroactively understand a gender identity and intersex people right before a certain medical point in medical history. But let's just sort of aggregate men and women. It's generally like 51% of the population is women, and the other half is men, or the slightly less half is men. And, if they were really worried about access, like having partners in the future, they wouldn't practice female infanticide. So I'm not convinced by this. The elites just, like hoard all the women. Like I understand that there are, let's say, elite women that are considered very valuable because of their family time, blah, 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 and they hoard all that. But it's not like a numbers game. Right? It's not like they have women, like millions of women penned in with just like horny guys on the outside, not being able to get access. That's never how it's been. So I'm a little less convinced by that one, but let's go ahead.
Hypothesis 5.
Oh, by the way, hi Flint, I am seeing your comments. So, but I'll just call you out at the end.
In pursuing their material and reproductive interests, women often engage in behaviors that promote male resource control and male control over female sexuality. Thus, women as well as men contribute to the perpetuation of patriarchy. As HRDY pointed out, it is not always in a female's reproductive interests to ally with other females against males. Often, females do better by competing with other females and or allying with males. Among humans, such female strategies can reinforce patriarchy.
I think you can point to people like Candace Owens, white women on the right, all of these individuals who decide to maximize their self-interest to get status from men who oppress them, rather than taking a lower status and working to liberate all the members of your group and other forms of oppression. So I know this Bus article, and I'm going to have something to say about this next. So
Bus, for example, has shown that, the world over, women express a preference for marrying men with more resources. This preference is consistent with the importance of resources to female reproductive success. Bus argues that women's preference for resource-rich men reinforces male-male competition for resources and thereby contributes to male resource control.
All right, so the problem with Bus's article there is that he just dumped a whole bunch of global data into a data set and then looked for correlations, or if he did some regressions. I can't quite remember the details of the article. What I mostly remember is an article written against Bus, saying that he had made no effort to identify nations that had high degrees of feminist liberation activity, women's were quite autonomous, versus women who were quite repressed in their countries. And they got his data set, and then they added basically a controlling for feminist activism and advancement in countries. And what they found was that in countries where, like in the West, and other parts of the world where women have achieved egalitarian or doing much better, this female preference for male being rich, what was it, marrying men with resources, actually goes down. And so it's not that women prefer resources, it's that women who have no access to independent economic autonomy are required to marry men based on resources, because that is their job. Like, they don't have another opportunity to go for a job. But if you give women money that they can earn their own money, then wanting a guy with money becomes way less important, because they don't got to worry about that. They can stand on their own 2 feet. And that was Bus's fatal flaw, is that he generalized the women who were the most oppressed and claimed that that was an instinct that all women had. And that was, bad sociology.
In polygynous, stratified societies, women increase their chances of marrying rich men by behaving in ways that increase paternity certainty, including compliance with customs designed to control female sexuality, such as claustration, purdah, and infibulation. Both women and men benefit reproductively when their female kin are able to marry rich, polygynous men because women married to rich men tend to produce polygynous sons, Betzig 1993:64. This may help to explain why women in such societies often actively support customs that control female sexuality and insist on their daughters' compliance. Women also support.
Another way of saying this is that patriarchy rewards those who help perpetuate its systems and punishes those whom seek to liberate themselves from the structures. And we see that today in the way that right-wingers demonize feminists, try to dehumanize them, try to basically demean them in all possible ways. Because if women don't listen to you just, when you say, because the man says so, then you've lost power. And there's nothing to replace that. Like, people don't take you seriously because you're the man. You just lost like a whole lot of status and ability to control your situation. Polygamous, they're here, I think they are talking about one man having multiple wives. So not polyamorous, not people who are in love with a lot of different people, but polygamous as in this case, a guy having like bigamy plus, more than two. So
Patriarchy by favoring sons over daughters and brothers over sisters. As mentioned earlier, in societies characterized by social stratification and polygyny, parents at the top of the hierarchy bias material investment towards sons because rich parents can expect to produce more grandchildren through sons than through daughters. Betzig, Personal Communication, points out that female kin, mothers, sisters, benefit reproductively from biased investment in polygynous sons just as much as do male kin, and the wives and daughters of rich men are therefore expected to support male-biased inheritance patterns.
all right, so let's just pull this out. I mean, I think Margaret Beaufort, if we look back, because I like English history, Tudor history, and whatnot, but she spent her entire life defending her son's claim to his place in the succession. She married different people to secure his rights and his land and his claims. And then, like when he finally got that, she became the Queen Mother. Because again, this was the only path open to her. And so these systems have built-in reinforcements, right? So it's meant to perpetuate itself. It's meant to recreate itself in the next generation. So the incentives go through inheritance in order to give people the same incentives. This is why it becomes so difficult to challenge these things, because they are a form of stability in some ways. But on the other hand, we've really moved on. Like, we've addressed a lot of this in the law. But in our minds and in our cultures, even though we say we think everybody's equal, you just look at how people talk about their fellow citizens. They don't think of them as equal. They want to take away their rights. Right? They want to get in their personal lives, their personal space, their beds, their genitals, and say, you can do this, you can't do that. Like, who are you? Right? But they have these attachment to these norms, and sometimes they think that they are godly, God directed to harm other people for the good of some being that they claim exists. So, just to say that when we look at these social structures, it is, you can't just point at an individual and say, why don't you do something? Yes, we have agency, but the social structures and all of the attitudes that are people get indoctrinated into are the things that have to be undermined first.
I have now hypothesized 5 critical features in the evolution of patriarchy in their expected chronological order, although the 5th one could apply at any point in the sequence. Female dispersal and the absence of strong female-female coalitions reduced female ability to recruit effective allies, kin and other females, against male aggression. Increasing elaboration of male-male alliances enhanced male power to coerce and control females. Increasing male control of resources helped consolidate male domination over females. Increasingly hierarchical male relationships enhance the ability of the most powerful men to coerce and control women and other men, and female reproductive strategies often supported aspects of patriarchy. I will now briefly touch upon a 6th factor that must have played a critical role in the evolution of patriarchy: language.
This is huge, so we're going to take a pause, and I want to intervene here to just have a little reflection on when were the times like that we saw the most progress in women's rights. And I think that these are that's a very difficult thing to narrow down, because oftentimes you see literally decades of women's activism and allies activism and trans people who are probably just not, like completely invisible, and intersex people and whatever else, but whomever else I should say. But certainly times where when you had educated middle-class women in Britain, at least, I can't really speak for feminism outside of Europe, because like Europe and the States are my background and that's what I know best. So I'm going to just refer to that because I don't want to sound really ignorant on other areas and give bad information. But you needed this sort of, it seemed like you needed a critical mass of women who were themselves educated to advocate for the education of girls more broadly. And education is the first step, because without education, you can't really get high skill jobs. And without a high skill job, you can't really have economic autonomy. At least, like in terms of access to it, you're always going to remain an underclass if all you do is physical labor. Right? Like just look at what happens with African Americans or Black Americans in the States, right? When they're denied education, denied literacy. Why? In order to keep them cheap labor, right? To make sure that they don't get too uppity and become a lawyer or president. Oh my gosh. And so the point, and then the other big shift was in the Second World War, probably the First World War too, when women became more autonomous, but definitely in the Second World War. Not that feminism happened then, right? But women had more economic autonomy. They had more job like equality because there weren't men around, so they were really necessary. And even though they wanted to go back to that like pre-war peacetime, the 1950s being a very conservative point in time, I think that those women raised their daughters with the idea that they could go to work and have a job because their mothers had. At least, in the white community, Black community, women were more oppressed because they were dealing with nexus of interracial stuff, and which is why we get white feminism, and there's a whole thing here. But so in the white feminist movement, you started to see more that 1960s generation having a sense of autonomy, and then they got into schools and colleges, which opened up their minds and opened up their career possibilities and all of this. So it really does come back to, I think, a basic notion of equality within one in-group, because then other people start saying, why am I not in this group? Why am I not equal? And using that against them. Education and economic autonomy. And that's really the foundation. So if you want to oppress, see oppression, I would imagine that those are the three nexes on which most state oppression of women happens. All right, yeah, Rosie the Riveter, exactly. All right, let's see if we can let a hypothesis. Okay, we're almost done. I think we're going to leave the future of patriarchy for next time, because we're going to be toward the end, and I think the ads roll out at 24 minutes, and I try to get the show done before that. So let's go with hypothesis 6 and see how we go.
Hypothesis 6. The evolution of the capacity for language allowed males to consolidate and increase their control over females because it enabled the creation and propagation of ideologies of male dominance, female subordinance, and male supremacy, female inferiority. Because we do not know when human language evolved, it is not clear at what point in the chronology outlined above this critical event occurred. Once the capacity for language evolved, it probably greatly facilitated further development of male-male alliances, male control of resources, and the development of hierarchical relationships among men by making it easier for men to communicate more directly and clearly about potential alliance formation and the uses to which such alliances could be put. In addition, once language evolved, humans could begin to develop and promulgate views of society that supported their own interests. In other words, ideologies were born.
I would also say that the solidification of a social construction of reality, even though there was a social reality pre-linguistically, because humans, like other primates, are social, so we had some ways of communicating that were maybe sounds that had meaning but didn't necessarily have all the characteristics of language. But not only were we sort of like collecting, an ideology to me is a set of ideas that are like have something in common or are linked by something and hang together. I would go farther than that. And even the notion of objects being permanent and having solidity and what a tree is versus like the roots of the tree and whether or not that's part of the tree, or all of that formalizing human experience into linguistic categories that then creates this idea that the world is completely external and all we do is innocently and unbiasedly perceive it. What we don't see is that we're looking at a mirror we ourselves constructed linguistically and then looking at that reflection going, oh, that's just truth. I had nothing to do with that. My mind is completely independent of that. Language is completely independent of that. I am just perceiving what is. And from that, you put in human behaviors like hierarchies, norms, and people see that and they think that that is what is good and what is normal and what is natural. So.
Based on the series of events hypothesized above, it seems likely that gender ideologies' views of society that justified male dominance over women were among the first ideologies ever invented.
I wouldn't say invented so much as solidified through language. It's not like they went, okay, now we're going to do something different when it comes to violence against females in our group. No, they just linguistically cemented in those power relations by describing them. They didn't have to invent them, if that makes sense. There's quibbles, but I think it's important to not over egg the pudding on the agency of human beings here. Inventing stuff, I think it's more of a reflection of solidifying things that they already saw.
Scholars have provided ample documentation of the ways in which gender ideologies both reflect and help to sustain male domination over women, and I will simply take this as a given here. The point I wish to stress is that men's use of language and ideology to keep women down is not a departure from pre-linguistic forms of male control, but rather a natural extension and elaboration of those forms.
That bit.
If male chimpanzees could talk, they would probably develop rudimentary myths and rituals that increased male political solidarity and control over females, and that decreased female tendencies toward autonomy and rebellion.
And if you had one with bonobos, you would explain why, like, it's really absolutely cool that females have sex with each other and bond and join together, and like they consider themselves equal members of the troop. I don't know if they're called troops when they're bonobos, but yeah. So our language can be used to enact or make rarefy. I think turn it from an abstract object into almost like its own material existence just by giving it a name.
Thus, although the capacity to use language to reinforce their power is unique to human males, the male motivation to use whatever means are available social, material, cognitive to increase control over females antedates the evolution of the human species by millions of years.
So yeah, when men are like, yeah, the man is more superior, you're just basically like, you might as well be a monkey from it now, because it's like the same structures that we came with when we stood upright and started using our thumbs more often, right? We need to evolve. The point is that we can evolve beyond this. That, as I mentioned, I think earlier, that patriarchy is like one of our original daddy issues as a species. And we've never reflected on this inheritance, this path-dependent power structure, because the people who benefit from it don't want to question it. They don't want to like rethink power and how it should be more fairly distributed and what we can do in society to redress the oppressions of one group by another. That's inconvenient. But that is the challenge. This is why we want to smash the patriarchy. Like, honestly, get beyond our monkey brains and start actually aspiring to the kind of human moral development that we claim that we're capable of.
And, in line with Hypothesis 5, women sometimes help perpetuate ideologies that support patriarchy.
Because, and motivation here is because the system benefits them, whereas what she doesn't mention is that transgressions get punished. Right? So it's not like they're really not necessarily happy about it, but you buy into it because that's how you get ahead. And if you make those incentives to continue the oppression, well, it's 2023, and we're still dealing with this stuff.
To summarize these hypotheses, 6 factors influence the evolution of human gender inequality. 1. A reduction in female allies. 2.
A reduction in female allies driven by men's divide and conquer strategies. It's not like women didn't want to ally. Men would, literally kidnap women from other villages and bring them over. Like, right, this is all the bridegroom thing and going over and stealing a woman and bringing her into your family. I don't know how many cultures where the husband goes into the wife's house and lives under her dad. Right? So even this idea of alliance, it's not like, I want to I want to locate the responsibility here where it belongs and not just make it like a neutral statement of a thing that happened. No, it's a thing that happened because people decided that that's what they wanted to happen.
Elaboration of male-male alliances 3. Increased male control over resources 4. Increased hierarchy formation among men 5. Female strategies that reinforce male control over females 6. The evolution of language and its power to create ideology.
I would say reality.
This analysis suggests that patriarchy
to solidify the social reality
is a product of reproductive strategies typically shown by male and, to a lesser extent, female primates, which in humans have undergone unusually effective elaboration. The roots of patriarchy lie in our prehuman past, but many of the forms it takes reflect uniquely human behaviors.
All right. Well, true. Again, like I said, I have some quibbles. And obviously with the benefit of 30 years almost now of hindsight, we can correct some of the misperceptions and stereotypes, sexist stereotypes that even a reflective feminist in 1995 was buying into because there wasn't evidence, right? That really did a good job of undermining the narrative. So, yeah, and Flint, you point out that cultural norms seem to almost like encourage women to be suspicious of each other and jealous, right, and compete, and that whole, catty, meow, all of that. That's so gendered that we use it for men now because somehow men, when they do the same thing, it's not gendered, it's not sexist, like it doesn't show their weaknesses or whatever. All right, so yeah, right now I am working on some the goal after I finish this because we are getting close to the end, and I've had such a appreciation for the ideas in this article and the ways of thinking about these things and putting them together. I really feel like this is a real treasure of research that sits behind a paywall of $40 and no one can freaking access it. But if you just take one article, you can do, right, open science, you can do fair use, you can do it for educational purposes, and you have to worry about copyright. But who has the ability to sit down and go through this? Well, I do. But maybe people won't have 6 hours, which is what the series is probably going to run to by the end. So my goal is like a 5-minute video where I do the sections and just do a real overview of this. And unfortunately, I can't get into all these deep, interesting potentialities or thought experiments or reflections on why we have the societies we do. But what I really want to get across in that 5-minute video is that patriarchy is a social structure that we can trace back all the way before we have human beings. We can still see patriarchy being practiced in our primate cousins. So we know this wasn't handed down by God. This is something that is like a consequence of power. Negotiating power within a group is a natural consequence of a social group, right? And then talk about her nature versus nurture. I won't spend as much time on it because I don't think you need to make that argument as strongly as she does anymore. People would generally accept that. And then talk about the contention point over sexual activity and who gets to have sex with whom. I don't really want to talk about reproductive strategies. I don't think so much because again, we have to buy into these just so stories of rationality and these calculations and cost-benefit analyses done with concepts and ideas of pregnancies and the cost of it and all that kind of stuff. But just say that sex is an area of contestation. Females have preferences, males have preferences, and these tensions in the animal kingdom, or at least in the primate part of the animal kingdom, have multiple solutions, and then go over the concepts of male coercion and male solidarity with female being coerced, and then the counter to that being female collective strength. And also related to that is females being taken out of their troops versus females who get to stay with their kin groups. And then look at the different patterns going from the most oppressive and pointing out that the things that are done in the most oppressive primate societies are what we would call today abuse. They are literally the grounds, like the formation of abuse, physical abuse, isolation, controlling resources, right? This is what abusers still do today. But we have another model on the other side, which is like women working together, men respecting women, men seeking out cooperation and approval, and having like negotiations. And that was an option too. And then the last part will kind of be dealing with, yeah, so if these were our options, why did we end up with such terrible, why do you end up with the most oppressive one? And getting into that. So hopefully, hopefully that will be able to be done in 5 minutes. I hope. We'll see how it goes. But that's what I'm working on in the background. So we are together, I think, for one last session next time. I think we will finish up. The conclusion is, just like a page or so. So next weekend, come back, y'all. We will go through the conclusion and reflect on what we learned. So I would like to hear more about identifiable inflection points like Rosie the Riveter, such that spark paradigm shifts, and how we can learn more from those. Oh, that's a good question. Because there's a lot of factors, like I've reduced it down to some important ones. That is a good question, Flint, and one I don't have time for today. But come back, maybe post it in the Discord. That would be great. Tag me or make me, think about that. And I guess until next week, Saturday or Sunday, depending on how much energy I have, I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. I hope you enjoyed this this penultimate episode for the evolutionary theory of patriarchy. I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. And thank you for your time and attention. And I hope you have a fantastic day wherever it is, whenever it is you are. Oh, look at this. You get to see the magic that happens behind the scenes. Okay. Bye.